get that going. Okay, wonderful. So, everybody, welcome to Kayla Noble's Artist Talk. Kayla is our featured artist of May 2025. I'm going to very briefly read an introduction of Kayla and then hand things over to her to give her talk. So, here we go. We are very happy to introduce today Kayla Noble as our featured artist of May 2025. Kayla is a second generation potter, born and raised in New York's Hudson Valley. She received her BFA in ceramics from SUNY New Paltz in 2015. She came to Aix-en-Provence and studied with the Leo Marchutz School of Painting and Drawing Community in 2013. She has completed several artist residencies, including Taos Clay in Taos, New Mexico, and acted as the Woodfire resident artist at the Clay Studio of Missoula in Missoula, Montana, where she leads large-scale community Anagama firings. I will now turn things over to Kayla to give her talk.
Hi, thank you so much. So I am very excited to be here and to share my studio practice and time at Marchutz with y'all. So I'm going to share my screen and then start my slide presentation. View slideshow. Okay. Oops. Hold on. From the beginning. There we go. So I like to start my artist talks with just kind of telling a little bit about who I am and where I've come from and how it kind of leads up to my practice. So this is me. I always took dress up really seriously, and you'll see that that comes into play later. So I grew up in the Hudson Valley of New York State, kind of surrounded by these big small mountains, big hills, small mountains, a very soft, gentle landscape, right on the Hudson River. And really, I feel like the Hudson Valley is like a very enclosed landscape. There's a lot of you're in the hills, you're in the mountains, you're in the trees. And I also grew up in a family of artists, a lineage of artists. So my grandmother, who now goes by Pepper, she went to art school, and this is a pot that she made in college. You can see her maiden name Kimmel, and it's dated 58. My mom also went to art school and studied ceramics briefly in college. The coil pot in the center is hers. And then on the right is my first coil pot that I made when I was 4. And I still have that in the collection. Oops. And so growing up in a family of artists, there was a lot of whimsy. My grandmother made this giant teacup out of one of those yard bins, and she paper mache'd the handle on it and then would fill it with water, and we would stir it and sit in it. And then this is her on the right at a craft show out east. She would do oil paintings. And she still is with us, and she now, for the last several years, would do a lot of cartooning for the publication at the community she lives in. And then her husband, my grandfather, was also an oil painter, and he primarily painted cars, and his paintings were quite large. So the painting on the left, it's probably about 2.5 by 4 feet in dimension. And then on my father's side, his dad, my grandfather, Brad Ben, he is a practicing potter. So he got introduced to potting when he was about in his 50s and then kind of took off from there, sold work at a lot of craft shows. He's based in Minnesota. And then before he made pots, he was a harpsichord builder. He bought a harpsichord kit to make one for his wife and then thought he could design a better instrument. So he did. He built about 100 instruments in his time. And so growing up around these people, my grandparents, I was constantly exposed to fine art and craft. So seeing those was something that was very normal in my life. And I ended up going to art school in SUNY New Paltz, and pursuing a degree in ceramics by way of drawing and painting. And so all throughout high school and college, I studied French. I also graduated with a minor in French. And I knew that studying abroad was something that was quite important to me. And through the SUNY network, I was able to do a study abroad program in Marchutz. And so that's how I found myself there. And this time, like, immersed in drawing and painting was really formative to, like, how I create, like, image and composition. I found the, like, technique or, like, the methodology taught in the school with, like, creating using mark making and color to create, structure. I think it's a really sculptural way of working, and so it really helped me to see, like, dimension and composition. I also think it was probably the best I ever got at figure drawing because I was doing it the most. Like, looking back on the drawings I was able to make then, I'm like, wow, it would take me some practice to get back to that. And then the time spent in the landscape, when you're going and drawing the same motifs and painting the same motifs over and over again, those compositions I felt really got stuck in my brain. So I feel like I can see like a very continuous line of those structures throughout my work. And then, yeah, we've got my painting of Alan on the left. And then when we were in Venice, I found John's secret painting spot. And so I snapped this picture of him and then I didn't go any closer. And that was fun. I got back to like the group and I was like, guys, I found John. um, and this was also the first time I really was introduced to contextualizing the work through literature. So a lot of the writings or the readings and how we talked about the readings was really new and exciting to me. And this poem by Robert Hass is something that I still really refer back to, and especially that one line, longing we say because desire is full of endless distances. I always go back to that, especially when I'm maybe a little lost in the studio. I'm like, okay, what's it about? Why are we here? All right, yeah, it's longing. And that I just like where I don't know when I don't know where to go, I go back to that line in the poem. And then almost like pulling out on the other way, thinking about how we're like contextualizing our practice in the architecture of the space that we're in. That was also something new to me as well. So a big part of our time there is the 10-day excursion in Venice. And seeing you have this opportunity to go and experience the place through the eyes of a painter, which is a completely different way of experiencing a new place than as like a person who's just traveling through it. And so because there was this expectation of volume of work that we were to produce over that time, we spent pretty much all day painting, and I would often go back to the same motifs and just paint them, draw them over and over again for different lengths of times and different mediums. And I found myself, and looking back in the pictures and like what I was drawn to, these compositions where there's this like tightness and constriction. Here it happens along the middle of the composition, and then an openness and expansiveness. And that's something I still look for in my work. This is one of the drawings from my time in Venice. I also think it's probably one of the best drawings I've ever done. It's of Piazza San Marco. And I feel like it really shows that tightness in the middle to like a open and explosionness from like a point of constriction to a point of openness. And then in addition to all of these like art experiences, I think a huge part of this for me was the human connections. And so a lot of the people that I met there, I'm still in contact with in one way or another. Whether if it's like keeping in touch on social media, on Instagram, or like Marielle and Hunter came to, or Forrest, sorry, came to visit me in the Hudson Valley afterwards. And then on road trips, I'll like sometimes connect with people. Um, and so that was a huge important takeaway as well. And so I go back to college, I'm back in New Paltz, and I'm still like working with these motifs. So I like took that scene that was in the photo earlier and like drew that a bunch of times on like this plate. I drew it, like I did a monoprint of it. And then when I was painting still, I was still trying to create structure through color blocking. And I developed this like way of mark making that's on like a horizontal and vertical plane, and that's something that still shows up when I'm like drawing to fill a page. I like really like horizontal and vertical lines coming together. And then you can kind of see like this thread of taking these like marks, these like brush strokes, and I feel like I then started to apply them to my clay work. New Paltz is really great in that it was a really technical program and then also a really conceptual program. So I was asked to think about my work in a pretty deep way. I still always kind of go back to exploring the vessel. I made these like sculptural vessel forms, which then turned into my senior thesis, The Other House. And this was installed on the campus's museum. And I was really interested in the home, but the home is a place of unreliable rules or boundaries. I was reading The Poetics of Space at the time, and then also House of Leaves, which is a nonfiction book. And both of those books, The Poetics of Space, by I think it's Baudelaire, talks a lot about this framing of the home as kind of this more psychological headspace that maybe like expands and contracts. And then House of Leaves, the novel itself also did not follow like linear logic. So that kind of like logic rooted in dislogic was another grounding point of my thesis. And then formally, I was really interested in just exploring like line to shape to form. And then how can you create information with like just a very simple line? And that's something too I've also kind of always been interested in, like what's the least amount of information you can give to create a composition or a structure. So right after undergrad, I accepted an artist residency in Taos, New Mexico. Moved out there. It was my first time being in the Southwest. I learned later that I had or learned that I had my uncle Rick, great uncle Rick, lived in Taos in the 80s and 90s. And so that's his spot up on the upper right with the old trucks and buses. He lived on the mesa. And it was cool too because I got to meet these people who like knew Uncle Rick and his partner Ringsella from like living on Taos Mesa in the 80s. And so out of undergrad, like right out of undergrad, I think is the most confusing time because you go from this highly structured studio environment to all of a sudden there's no one telling you what to do, which is both a blessing and a curse because you can do every idea. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's like a weird rabbit hole. And so I became like just focused on the vessel again. I closed the forums because I was like, well, if they're functional pots, maybe someone will buy something. Um, no one really did, but when I was in New Mexico, that was when I got introduced to wood firing. So in short, wood firing is a process where you're only using wood to hand stoke a kiln. You're getting typically a very large kiln, which is like the firings I do, a very large kiln, hot, only by wood. There's a group of people, anywhere from like 6 to 12 people, hand stoking the kiln around the clock. And so I was invited to participate in a firing, and I go out to this site. It's in the middle of the mesa. It's an hour outside of town, completely off grid. And there's just these like group of people working together to fire this kiln. And it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen, both the kiln itself firing, but also the like communal labor happening. And so I kept exploring wood firing. Um, at first, really enchanted by the process. And then the more I did it, the more I kind of understood the surfaces I was looking at and found that that was the answer I was searching for in my work. Because even in my undergrad work, it was largely unglazed. I was really interested in what can the clay do. And then I found this process where the clay is doing everything. It's the clay and wood ash together. So I like to put in all my pieces bare, and the color that happens is from the color of my clays and the atmosphere and what's happening in the kiln. And when you first start, it's this really uncontrollable process. You put it in the kiln and you don't know what to expect and to what comes out. And then by a series of events and a pandemic, I found myself back in New York in the Hudson Valley. Um, Doing lockdown in a pretty extreme way and didn't have access to clay for quite some time. Did some like fibers projects for fun, got clay, started coiling again. And then as things started opening up, I started to seek out wood firing again because I couldn't really think of a better way to finish my work. And it was a process that I knew I wanted to learn more about. And so I got the opportunity to fire in many different situations, some private kilns, some workshop kilns. And that was really beneficial because I got to see all these different ways of organizing firings, organizing a lifestyle around wood firing, different sizes of kilns, different sizes of like groups that you're inviting people into. One pretty solid constant with people who would fire though is there is this um there's community by necessity because you can't fire these large kilns by yourself. And then with community, there's a pretty large focus on food. And yeah, how could you not like that? And so by putting all my work in these different kilns, I got to see this huge spectrum of surfaces and kind of start to get an idea of why something was happening, how to control it, and then also like what did I want my work to look like? Because I didn't know the surface that I was looking for because I hadn't seen it yet. Um, and then when you're putting your work in other people's kilns, you're getting their surfaces too, which is great. And it's a great way to learn. I was introduced to a process called reduction cooling, which is that piece on the left. And at first, when I pulled it out of the kiln, I was like horrified because it's like really dark, it's really rich in texture. But the more I sat with it, the more um sense it made on my work. And I was like, I know like something about here is making a lot of sense. And yeah, these are other examples of that like darker, moody palette that was starting to really talk to me. And so I felt like I was at a point where I needed to make decisions for myself and learn how to fire a wood kiln, like how to really do it without someone else being in charge. And it was like I wanted to make the mistakes myself. I wanted to know like what was a good choice, what was a bad choice. And I was like, cool. Like, and so I ended up doing a post back where I got my undergrad at SUNY New Paltz. And they have a wood kiln and they don't have any wood fire programming, which I was like, that's great. No one's gonna tell me what to do. Because I was like, if I'm gonna fire like I'm gonna do it and maybe it'll be a bad firing, but that's great because that's my bad firing. So I got it was myself, another graduate student, and then a group of like five completely new to wood fire undergrad students who were just like super keen to like want to split wood at 9 a.m., which I thought was crazy for an undergrad student to want to do that. So we sourced all this wood, fired the kiln about 3 times, and got like oh wait oh I wanted to say first so going back to New Paltz, one of my favorite projects that they do is in the graduate cohorts, the metal and the ceramic graduate cohorts both do this project over the summer where you have to generate 100 drawings. Realistically, you do like 80 to 100 and then exhibit them on the second day back or second week back at school and have a critique. So for my 100 drawings, I wanted to really narrow my parameters. So I did all same size paper, same medium. I used a Pilot V5 pen, which those are my favorite drawing pens, and then exhibited it in a grid. And the motifs came from a landscape that I painted a lot when I was in Marchutz. There's this one motif where I was like in the woods, in the trees, and the way the like structure of it, that's something I always go back to when I doodle. And so I use that as a starting point and then kind of let it expand organically from there. Because I think too, when you give yourself a really shallow hole to dive down, things can really open up and become quite expansive. And then again, with this project, I was also exploring like how can like one line create a composition and have that be enough as well. And then the piece on the right was also exploring these moments of like tension and kind of pull. So then, yeah, these are the surfaces that I was able to get from my firings. Still exploring the vessel. And then because there wasn't like wood fire mentorship, I didn't know the things that you weren't supposed to do, which is great. So I like put clay bodies like right in the front of the kiln that a lot of people would say not to do. Um, and then I started developing, in addition to the vessels, these trays, the piece in the center. Um, I like had this idea of to like make a tray to serve fruit on. And after I made a couple of them, I looked at, because I'd put some of those line drawings on my wall. I looked at the line drawings and I was like, oh, that's where that came from. So I use drawing a lot in my practice, not always as a way to sketch what I want to make, but kind of as a way to just like create ideas and a language. And then maybe months later, those motifs will show up in the ceramic work in a way that maybe I was expecting or maybe I wasn't. Also, at this time back at school, since New Paltz in our like midterm and final critiques, there's a lot of emphasis placed on display. I was really struggling with the way to display the work in a way that I wanted to communicate something. And so I decided to explore the work through photography instead and display the photos and then display the work on pedestals. And I developed this like kind of performative way of showing the work, but I was interested in like incorporating it was like the body, the ceramic work, and then food. And food more of as like a mark making tool than as like a consumable material. And I really liked the way that berries would stain my skin. So I'd kind of like build up this like patina on my hands almost. Um, and then like document the work with this mess and then would like clean up the mess and then just show the photos of it. And that was like a really interesting way too to like show this record of a thing that happened but control the viewfinder that the like audience gets to see. And a lot of people would just like liked or wanted to describe this as performance, but I also feel as if I wouldn't want to do it as a performance, but having the record of it is almost more powerful because it doesn't reveal everything. There's still quite a lot left to mystery. And so I finished the postbac. I applied to the Woodfire residency in Missoula, Montana, and was awarded it, accepted, and moved out here almost 2 years ago. And so it was August 2023. So again, I got to drive across the country, move back to the West, and be in this like desert, dry, clayey, vast landscape. I think my favorite part about the American West is you have these records of kind of impermanent structures that were then abandoned and start to decay. Like I love falling apart cabins and trailers, especially in the Southwest. There's a lot of these like beautiful trailers that are just like being pulled apart by the landscape. And so, as a part of my residency, I'm leading these like absolutely massive community firings in this massive kiln. So, in the bottom right, you can see that's my friend Andy. He's about 6'4", so he can lay across it comfortably. The front of it gets even wider. And in this role, I got to like I've learned so much. I got to learn how to use a chainsaw, just like so much about processing wood, the like physical labor about it, and then community leadership. Because with each firing, I'm leading groups of 16 to 18 people through this incredibly demanding week and a half long process. And then what's so amazing here is I've never lived in a place where there's such strong community knowledge around wood firing. And then because the scale of the kiln, these community members who range anywhere from like full-time artists to kind of like hobbyists who also work part-time to or like sell part-time to people who only do it as a hobby, have no interest in selling their work. So people practicing on this huge spectrum are all participating together. And then because of the scale of the kiln, these people get to work at a scale which is just monumental. So the picture on the left, the chair that I made, that is 57 inches. So that's the top of the kiln. And also by working at this scale, you're posed with these really interesting problems of how to move the work. So how are you going to get it from the studio to the kiln site? Because that's half an hour out of town, from the truck to the kiln pad to in the kiln to on the kiln shelf. And these are like around 300 pounds. Um, so it's these like monumental tasks. And then we're firing for about, I found 8 days to really be like the sweet spot because you get to develop this like ash accumulation. And that's what I'm quite interested in. And so by again being in charge of these firings, I got to really develop my firing program so that way, and what I mean when I say firing program is like how I am firing the kiln. So when certain things are happening, what shutdown looks like, what the down firing looks like, and develop in a way where I could like maybe find the surfaces that I knew I wanted for my work, but wasn't quite sure what they were yet. And so I've been able to get these like really beautiful spectrums of, I knew I wanted something light and dark at the same time, but I didn't know what that meant. And then I had these firings where I was shutting down and down firing. Down firing means putting wood in the kiln as it's on a cooling cycle in a really aggressive manner. I was putting a lot of wood in, getting a lot of black billowing smoke and just got these surfaces that really excited me. And I unloaded them and I was like, there, that's it. It's light and dark at the same time. And then when you're firing, work this big in such an aggressive manner, there is quite a lot of guaranteed failure. I had to do a lot of adjusting with my clay bodies to make something that could like withstand those really extreme circumstances. And that's what I really love about wood firing too. It's this really beautiful blend of like highly technical knowledge that you need to do it correctly with like physical labor, with like a community aspect. And I think I love being able to balance the kind of like whimsy and like ethereal nature of the process with also this highly technical way of working as well. And then for me, what's a smaller part of my practice is working with wild clay and local material. So my friend and colleague Andy Bugos, he works only with hand dug material. So he goes through different geologic surveys and has probably dug clay from about 50 plus locations over Montana, clays and rocks, and then formulates them through a very long like testing process and has developed these clay bodies to work with. And I actually have a physical example. So this was the bottle that I'm holding, was clay that Andy dug, formulated it with like made a clay body, took granite, made it like added enough granite so that way it would melt. And then this I fired in my last firing. And I think it's just another, like, just a nice way to get outside, spend time, and then also really connect with the land and the landscape. And so this is what's going on in the studio right now. I feel like the bottles and the work was getting really tight, so I wanted to loosen that up. I also wanted to continue to push the scale that I was working at. I've been wanting to work more sculpturally, but that's been kind of elusive because sculpture can be anything, and it's been hard for me to figure out like what the boundaries of sculpture are. So I was like, well, maybe I'll make furniture. So I made this chair, which it happened. I think when you're making new work, and especially with big work, like you're gonna have to make it a few times before it's like a finished, resolved thing. Um, and then yeah, I like always go back to my sketchbook. So whether it's just like trying to like doodling compositions or drawing the forms, or sometimes I'll start a form, draw it, and think about how I want to finish it. I'm really interested in what these kind of like looser abstract drawings could be in a sculpture. That's something I haven't quite figured out yet, but we'll see. There's a lot of time. And then yeah, and that takes us to here. I have my last firing. We're loading this Friday. For this one, I got to invite participants from out of town. So I have a handful of local people that I'm working with and some guests coming from as far as North Carolina and then California and Utah. And yeah, I get to fire this kiln one more time. And then after this residency concludes in August, I'll be moving to St. Petersburg, Florida to do another ceramic residency and continue my like large scale onagama wood firing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kayla. That was so lovely. Little round of applause via Zoom for you. Thank you so much. Now we can open it up to questions from our lovely audience here. So for everybody on Zoom, you're all automatically muted. So if you just want to like raise your hand like this, and I can sort of field questions, and you'll just have to go ahead and unmute yourself. I'll get us started with the first question. Kayla, you were talking about your time in Venice with Marchutz, and you were talking about how you felt like the landscape, there was some tightness and sort of constriction in the middle, and then the openness and expansiveness in the sky and in the water. And I'm curious how that sort of idea now sort of presents itself in your work, because I think you mentioned you felt that same tension between the tightness and then the expansiveness as you've moved forward with your work. Can you
Hmm.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I try and with the vessels on a form like want to like a tight and then an openness. So like the the body feeling full and then having there be like a moment of tension to then maybe the lips are that openness. And then I think with how I sketch too, I have the one I showed a picture of in front of me. Like the compositions always have like a pull in and then opens. And that's something that I think sculpturally too, like would be really interesting to explore.
Mhm. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions for Kayla or comments too? Alan, you just have to unmute yourself. Let's see if I can help. There you go.
Yeah, Kayla, I'm interested in those last drawings that you showed at the very end and really all the way through. I'm trying to think of the name of the artist that I'm trying to think of, and I can't think. Do you feel like you have an affinity for any other artist in relation to how you draw? That's one question I have. Second question is, how do you, in terms of the firing and the glazing, is that when you do that, is that related? Are you thinking about like the form of the pot in relation to how you want the glaze to come out with each individual pot? Or is it more of a surprise kind of situation with the wood burning?
Yeah. So I think for rendering, I mean, I definitely like looking at Giacometti's work a lot because he also has
Uh-huh.
that real like just like pull, it like pulls in,
Yeah.
it pulls in, it pulls in. And then a contemporary artist whose work I really enjoy. She's known more for her large scale work. Oh, are you gonna say
Yeah.
something? Is
Now I'm trying to think
oh,
of the name of it. He's very famous, the guy who does sort of the big canvases with like circles with drawings. He
hmm.
does a lot of different circles. Anyway, I'll think of his name in a minute, but it reminds me of your work. I just thought maybe. But tell me about who you're talking about.
Ursula von Reitingsgar, I think
Ah,
that's how you say her
okay.
name. She makes like large, very large scale wood and bronze sculpture. And then
Mhm.
also has a body of two-dimensional work that is a lot of like lines and like circles on a grid. Um yeah, I
Yeah,
like her work a lot. And then with the surface in the wood kiln, now I make the shapes. I know pretty much exactly where and how I'm going to load the work as I'm making it. I think when you first start out, there's just like so many elements. A lot of it does feel um there's a lot of surprise, but I feel like I've gotten to the point where I've done this enough. I have I guess you could like I have a hypothesis about what's going to happen. And so I think
right.
about like, okay, this part of the kiln, I need to make this kind of shape to fill the space well. This when I like the marks of the ash going maybe vertical on a piece. So I'll like know
Wow.
I load it on the side. And then if it's like a more challenging form, I'll think about like how I want to load it and then build to suit that.
Wow. So, for instance, when you talked about those, there were a couple of those beautiful pieces where you had a light and a dark aspect with the different
Mhm.
colors. So, when you load your uh, piece into the kiln, do you have to put that piece in a particular position or a particular place so that, for instance, you want the top part to be the lighter part and the bottom to be the darker part? Is that, or is that just
Cu-
hope godness?
no, so there's different zones of the kiln, and one part of the kiln where I like my work and try to create a lot of space like that is the firebox. So that is where wood is going in and you're building up ember beds. And
Uh-huh.
I like having my work buried in ember beds for a lot of the firing. So I'll load in a way that that can happen. And then throughout the firing, I make choices for when to build those ember beds up, how long to hold them there, when to burn them down, let that totally melt, and then build them up so they're burying the pieces again. And you get these almost like tide lines on them, and then a different surface from where the work was buried to where it's not buried. And then to achieve that, that means like me communicating to the crew in a way that's also like they can understand what the goal is.
Right.
Yeah.
Whoa. Interesting.
There's a lot of variables, and then a lot of what happens to like create those really like big color spectrums is how I choose to shut down and cool the kiln as well.
Thank you. Yeah, interesting.
Oh, cool. Kayla, I'm curious, are you going to be doing the same sort of thing in St. Petersburg, Florida?
Yep. Yep. They have a they have a large scale wood kiln, so I'll be able to like continue developing this work and like working with pretty big groups too.
I'm interested in how your work is going to be affected by, because you've been talking about the West a lot and how your work might be affected by the Southeast
Yeah,
by the beach.
I know I'm so curious because I've never been to the tropics before. So it's like, yeah, I'm moving to the tropics. And there is the ocean. So that's like a different sort of vastness.
Yes,
That's different and similar to like the plains. There's no mountains. So yeah, I'm really curious to see too how like all of the, especially like the like botanics are going to be completely different too.
definitely. Mary, go ahead.
Will the type of wood that you use affect the burning? Because the wood is probably going to be different on Southeast versus Montana. I mean, there's a lot of pine in the US, but
Mm.
like the humidity, the salt in the air, does that affect the kiln? Or is it so closed up, it doesn't? I'm just like,
Yeah, no, that's bang on. Like the type of wood absolutely influences what's happening, especially when you're burning from like hardwoods and softwoods, because those burn so differently. And here we are using, yeah, a lot of pine, a lot of softwoods. Those are typically a lot less dense. They'll burn a lot hotter and faster. You need to burn a lot more wood. And then when I'm moving in St. Petersburg, they're firing with all oak, so like super dense. And then the wood there, everyone like in the field is like, oh man, the wood in Florida is crazy. Like it's so salty. Like you've never seen anything like it. So my hypothesis is that like I was able to develop clay bodies that looked really good in these like pine firings, so that way when I take them to St. Petersburg, they're gonna look like really, really good. Because it's hard to make softwood. It's harder to get color from softwood, and it's a lot easier to get those colors from those like really mineral dense hardwoods. So I don't know. We'll find out, but yeah, the type of wood has a lot of influence both in the surface and then also like how it burns and how you're firing.
Another question? Can I
Go for it.
speak?
Yeah, go for it, Alan.
So, yeah, I'd like to know, how do you get those big pieces, those 300-pound pieces into the kiln? That's one question. And is it harder to take them out or to
Yeah.
get them in there? And third, where do you put them after you take them out? I mean, how do you store this stuff before you have an exhibition, or what do you do with them?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. So, use a lot of tools and lift carts. So you can
Uh,
build on pallets, which you could then fit like a pallet jack and like get that on a truck, or like I
yeah,
built hydraulic carts. And then I build on drywall. So I have my like structure, drywall. So it could be like my pallet, my board, whatever, drywall, and then the piece. And then I will fire it on that drywall. The drywall goes in the kiln. So you can like, you jack it up, get it on the truck, drive up carefully to the kiln, get to the site. And then if it's like crazy heavy, like sometimes other people who I work with will bring like a pallet jack up to the site on a trailer. Or what we've done and how we got my chair out of the truck is just like 6 people like hoof, like
mm,
get the pallet down and then wheel it into the kiln. And then you, since it's on drywall, you can just slide it.
okay.
Like if you have sand, so you've got little ball bearings and it just slides. The harder part is, Mhm.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, and then the
Go
harder
ahead.
part is getting it out because it's not on that board anymore. And
Uh-huh.
usually we'll like, I think for my chair, we like tipped it onto a dolly and then rolled it out. Big work too, and what a colleague of mine does is after it's finished, he'll build a pedestal, like a small pedestal, the piece sits on it, and then
Mhm.
he builds a frame around it. And so you
Mhm.
can like tip it, cart it, and then when you set it down, it's already on the pedestal. And then you get a storage unit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where's your chair? Where's
What?
your,
The
where is your,
chair, the chair was not, I had some clay body problems, so it wasn't successful. And the chair lives at the kiln site. Um,
okay,
yeah, which
yeah.
that's
So you can
yeah,
show it.
part of the process too.
Wow, what a process.
It
Oh,
is. And yeah, I'm building some larger pieces now that, God willing, they come out. And for that, I'll like, yeah, build frames around them and then move them out to Florida.
also, the community aspect is really beautiful. It's much more like putting on a theater piece, with a group of people than it is the lonely artist,
Yeah.
out there by herself. That must be really fun.
It's really nice. It is because often like ceramic is communal by nature because it involves so much big equipment that's usually not realistic to like own yourself. And so because
Yeah,
of that there's a lot of community studios, but even if you like have a private studio, getting to kind of like come all work together around the firing is really lovely.
yeah,
And then it's this like kind of like hive mind to like work towards this one common goal. Yeah, it's quite a lot of labor.
yeah.
Sharon, did you have
Sharon,
a
I
question?
interrupted you.
You'll just have to unmute yourself. Let's see if I can help.
There it is. Am
Mhm.
I unmuted now?
You are.
Yes. Hey, I was just curious, does the color come primarily from whatever type of wood you're burning? Or do you actually use a glaze of some sort as well? And if you use a glaze, what kind of composition are the glazes made of?
So I think of the color as coming from three variables. So the wood is part of it. The atmosphere of the kiln is a bigger part, and then what's in your clay or slips. So I typically put all my work in bare, but I've done a lot of work developing clay bodies that yield those colors. So it is the ceramic material. Sometimes I'll use Shino glazes. Um, but yeah, it's the like those three things working together. So like how you're firing the kiln and what your material is doing.
And when you say the atmosphere, that has to do with the amount of heat or the amount of ash or
The
all
amount
of those
of
things.
the amount of uncombusted fuel. So you
Oh,
can like fire like dirty, meaning that there's a lot of like vapor, extra vapor in the kiln, or you can fire efficiently with, and it's just like burning really clean. So when you choose to make those things happen, will yield different colors or like different
and
surface qualities.
and so I think I heard you say that you sometimes in the process go back in to maneuver something or another. So you're cooling the kiln down at that point so that that allows you to make movements, or I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about here,
no.
but I was wondering how long does it stay too hot for you to do anything?
Yeah, so I am controlling the atmosphere as it cools down to a certain temperature. So once the kiln gets down to 1600 degrees, then I like go home and the process is done. And what that kind of looks like is, we're at peak temperature, it's really hot. we shut down the kiln, and then instead of just ending and leaving then, I put wood in to keep it really hazy, and still burning.
Okay.
Yeah, and many people do it many different ways. And so I kind of like found a method that yielded surfaces that I liked.
Mm.
Very cool.
How long is the burn usually?
Yeah, for this size kiln and the surfaces that I'm looking for, like 8.5 days.
Oh, wow.
We're burning, I think I burned like 14 cords of wood, and a cord of wood is 4 by 4 by 8 feet volume. So it's a lot. And then
So somebody has to be there 24/7?
yep. So I schedule it in like 6 hour shifts
Yeah.
that people cycle through, and then towards like the last 4 days, I'll usually like just kind of camp up there and be pretty present, because then certain choices about like when certain ember beds need to burn down or be built back up, I need to be there for. But yeah, 8 days, a little over a week. It's full
Great.
on.
That is
Life, good
amazing.
life.
Mm.
So great.
Kayla, we've talked a lot about wood. What are your sources of clay, and are there variations on that make a difference?
Yeah, I like using stoneware clay bodies, and I'll, for my material, get it like the different components of it from a distributor, and then mix it together myself. Um, and then like for my friend who's working with all hand dug materials, like we go to different sites in Montana, and just like hand dig it, process it, put it through screens ourselves, and then do a lot of testing. And when you're developing your own clay body from commercially sourced materials too, that also involves a lot of testing. So yeah, and I don't buy like pre-made bags of clay, because you can do that too. But I just wasn't having the control that I was looking for. And
Mm.
especially for building at the scale that I am, that also requires a lot of refinement to make the clay work at that scale too.
My goodness.
It's a process from start to finish. Any last questions or comments for Kayla before we wrap up today? No?
I see Kaylee.
Oh, Kathleen. Kathleen, did you want to say something?
Kayla, do you like to write?
I do, yeah.
Well, I don't want to be greedy and make this about writing, but I can't help it. I've been sitting here this entire time, probably like everybody, in love with the vocabulary and the processes and the words and so many things you've said. They seem so like ripe for metaphor. And I just keep thinking this whole thing and landscape and all these changes in your life and in your art as it develops. I just keep thinking this would make the most beautiful essay. So you should do it.
No,
It's
I
great.
like to write a lot, and I like writing in like the essay format and like poetry format, and that's something I would like to like publish a book
Yeah.
one day.
Fab. But
Nice.
good luck with your beautiful work and have a great time in Florida. That's going to be beautiful, a beautiful experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited to see what unfolds.
And don't
Yes.
get hurt. My goodness.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Kayla. This has been so wonderful. Thank you for sharing your whole process and your work with us. We are so grateful for you taking the time to put together such a beautiful presentation. We can do another little
so
round of applause, virtual round of applause, and keep us updated with what you're doing in St. Petersburg.
Yeah,
I can't wait to
absolutely.
see your work. So
Mhm.
exciting.
All right.
Thank you,
Merci, Kayla.
everyone, for joining.
Thanks, Kayla.
Pleasure.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.